The signal hit the chamber floor wrong. That's the first thing Cashin noticed. A drop made of wood and string, hitting steel like a hammer. 300 cadets watched a sphere of tungsten punch through a drone sensor port from 40 meters, and not one weapon in the room had fired a single watt of energy to do it. I don't need targeting assistance. My hand remembers what the Academy forgot. That line would end up carved into the college's incident archive within the week. But on the morning it started, nobody in the lab thought a slingshot would matter at all. The Starbound Weapons College sat on 4 orbital rings above a dead moon, where the light was simulated and the silence was engineered to be calm, not empty. 1,000 years ago, autonomous guidance became doctrine. The teachers stopped building weapons. They built systems that wielded them. Nobody questioned it anymore. It was just how things worked, the way breathing worked, the way the rings turned without anyone pushing them. Professor Maroth had spent 70 years inside that doctrine. He was Velusian, narrow and chitinous, with pale compound eyes that read data the way other people read faces. When he walked the lab floor that morning, his mandibles clicked twice. A habit cadets had learned to read as mild disapproval. At the sight of a human cadet, setting a plain wooden frame down on an evaluation table. "Cadet Vey," Maroth said, "is that the entirety of your submission?" Cashin nodded. He didn't explain. He never explained more than the moment needed. Around him, the lab buzzed with better-dressed weapons. A Silvari cadet's photonic dart launcher hovered on a magnetic cradle, throwing geometric light across the ceiling. A Tolikian cadet's callbow hummed at a frequency that made the air taste faintly of ozone. A Velkar cadet's ionized arrow rig sat coiled like glass rope, ready to curve through any moving target the simulators could throw at it. And on Cashin's table, a slingshot. Laminated wood, a synthetic cord worn smooth at the notch, and a satchel of tungsten spheres that clinked together like loose teeth. The room had already decided what that meant. A Silvari cadet near the back laughed first, a clean clicking sound through her exoskeleton. "Is that a child's toy?" Cashin didn't look at her. He adjusted the cord's tension with 3 fingers, feeling for the give instead of checking a readout. "No," he said. "It's the only thing here that asks something of the person holding it." That should have been the end of the exchange. It wasn't. Maroth tilted his head, mandibles ticking. "Does it have predictive tracking?" "No, sir." "A stabilizing base?" "No, sir." "Homing capability of any kind?" A short pause. Cashin's jaw tightened, the only tell he had. Just hands. Laughter went round the room like water through empty pipes, thin, hollow, not quite cruel yet. Maroth folded his clawed hands behind his back and offered the kind of diplomatic neutrality that 70 years of teaching had perfected. "Charming," he said. "I'm sure this will provide excellent comparative data on why we discontinued such methods. Autonomous guidance became doctrine 1,000 years ago. We stopped building weapons. We built systems that wielded them." Maroth had said some version of that sentence to 1,000 cadets before Cashin. He said it now without expecting an answer. He didn't get one. Cashin just lifted the frame, checked the band once more, and set it back down with the same stillness he'd carried in with. Here's the thing nobody in that lab knew yet. In 3 days, this exact device would put a tungsten sphere through Maroth's own assistant drone, and the Academy's 1,000-year doctrine would have its first real crack. If you told me how that morning would end, I wouldn't have believed it either. But I watched it happen. Stay with me. 6 days before the lab assignment, Cashin had been somewhere else entirely, somewhere with real dirt under real boots. He'd grown up on a hunting tract on Earth's northern coast, where his grandfather taught him to read wind off the back of his neck before he ever read a sentence off a page. The slingshot wasn't an academy assignment to Cashin. It was a tool he'd carried since he was 9 years old, the same frame replaced twice, the same grip pattern worn into his palm like a fingerprint. When the transfer notice came, Starbound Weapons College, rare human placement, full scholarship, his grandfather had only said one thing: "Bring the frame. Let them laugh first. Aim later. Cashin had laughed at that. Now, standing in a lab full of glowing prototypes, he understood it wasn't a joke. Back in the lab, the assignment notice scrolled across every workstation screen at once. Build a primitive ranged weapon for educational purposes. A nostalgic tribute to early kinetics. No assist systems required. Submissions evaluated in the kinetic evaluation chamber 3 days from now. A Velkar cadet near Cashin's table read the notice twice, frowning at the word nostalgic like it tasted bad. They're letting us bring toys to a weapons evaluation, she said to no one. How is this going to count toward anything? Maroth answered without turning. Because every generation needs to be shown why we stopped using them. That was meant to close the conversation. Cashin opened it again, quietly. Or it shows you something else, he said. Maroth's compound eyes settled on him, processing. And what would that be, Cadet Vey? That you can't outdesign a hand that's already decided where it's going. The room went a little quieter than it had been. Not silent, just quieter, the way a held breath is quieter than a sigh. A few cadets exchanged looks. The Silvari cadet who'd called it a toy crossed her arms, exoskeleton ticking with the nervous, till she had whenever hierarchy felt threatened, a habit she didn't know she had yet, but would notice in herself by the end of the week. Maroth simply inclined his head, mandibles clicking once, and walked on to the next table. He didn't argue. He didn't need to. 70 years of doctrine doesn't argue with one cadet's slingshot. It just waits to be proven right. It almost was. 2 days before the evaluation, the lab had moved into open testing. Drones drifted on low patrol, recording every cadet's progress for the instructor's review. Cashin spent most of his time at a corner bench, not building anything new, just running his cord through his fingers, checking the weave for fray, loading and unloading the same 3 tungsten spheres until the motion stopped feeling like motion and started feeling like breathing. A Tolikian cadet, weapons master in training, watched him from 2 benches over and finally crossed to ask, in the clipped, frequency-precise way his species spoke, "Your design has no power source, no feedback loop. How do you correct for error?" "I don't correct for it," Cashin said. "I remove it before I release." The Tolikian considered this the way he considered everything, as data requiring classification. That is inefficient. Humans are not naturally more accurate than calibrated systems. "No," Cashin agreed, "but I've done this 10,000 times. Your bow hasn't done anything yet." The Tolikian had no answer in his vocabulary for that, so he simply recorded it as an anomaly in his notes and walked away. His exact words later quoted, without context, to half the lab by sundown. By the time evening cycle dimmed the simulated sky, 3 rival cadets had drifted toward Cashin's bench, drawn the way people are always drawn toward something they've decided to find foolish. The Silvari cadet led them. "You really think that thing competes with what we built?" she asked, gesturing at the glowing rigs lined up behind her like a small armory. "I'm not competing with your weapons," Cashin said. "I'm competing with your aim." "It doesn't even have targeting assistance," the Tolikian put in. "I don't need it." The Velkar cadet stepped closer, arms folded, crystalline skin catching the low light. "So your primitive instincts are better than centuries of refinement." Cashin looked up at her, calm, unhurried. "They're mine," he said. "That's the advantage." Nobody laughed that time. The night before the evaluation, Cashin sat alone at the peripheral maintenance range, running one last check on the frame under the moon substitute lighting. The wood had darkened slightly from handling, the cord worn smooth at the notch from years, not days, of use. He didn't polish it. He just checked it the way you check a friend's pulse, out of habit, not worry. He didn't know yet that the next morning would end with Maroth's personal drone smoking on the chamber floor, or that a phrase he hadn't said yet, it was the most difficult target available, would end up quoted in an incident report that changed mandatory curriculum within the month. He just knew the cord held. He just knew his hand remembered the draw. He packed the satchel, 3 spheres rattling soft against each other, and walked back toward the dormitory ring under a sky built to look like stars nobody on this moon would ever actually see. Cashin had slept the way he always did before something that mattered. Not long, but completely. The kind of sleep that doesn't ask permission from nerves. The kinetic evaluation chamber smelled like ionized metal and cold air, the specific mineral bite of filtered light that belonged to nowhere else on the rings. Kinetic absorption panels lined every wall, black and faintly humming, built to swallow whatever a weapon threw at them, so the chamber itself never wore down. Drones circled the ceiling on slow orbits, recording everything in real time. 300 cadets filled the gallery seats above the floor. Below, 6 evaluation stations waited in a half-circle, each one wired into the chamber's tracking grid. Maroth stood at the center podium, hands folded, mandibles still. "Today," he said, "you will demonstrate precision under controlled conditions. The chamber will register impact, error margin, and method. Begin in submission order." The Silvari cadet went first. Her photonic dart launcher locked onto 3 rotating targets without her hand moving more than an inch, each dart finding dead center in under a second. Green confirmation marks bloomed across the overhead display. Applause, brief and polite, the sound of a result everyone had already expected. The Tolikian went next. His coilbow fired twice, the second bolt splitting the first clean down the shaft mid-flight, a trick that drew actual gasps from the gallery. He didn't smile. He simply logged his own score before the system finished calculating it. Then the Velkar cadet stepped up, releasing an ionized gas arrow that curved through the air like it was being steered by an invisible hand, because it was. It tracked a moving target through 2 evasive turns and struck true. The crowd nodded along, satisfied, the way people nod at something they already believed. 3 for 3. No surprises. The chamber had done exactly what the chamber was built to do. Then Maroth said, "Cadet Vey." Cashin walked to the 6th station and set his satchel down. Maroth studied the slingshot a moment longer than he had the others' weapons combined. "I should warn you," he said. "The field is calibrated for micro-projectile tracking. Your device carries no digital signature. The drones may not register your performance at all." "That's fine," Cashin said. "I'm not using energy. The system will not assist you. I'm not asking it to." Maroth tilted his head, mandibles clicking faintly. The Tel-Cashin had learned to read by now, the sound of an assumption being quietly recalibrated. "Then proceed." Cashin loaded the first sphere into the cord's leather cradle. He set his stance low, and even, the frame steady in his left hand, the cord drawn back with 3 fingers of his right. His breath slowed the way it always did, the way his grandfather had taught him before he was old enough to understand why it mattered. He released. There was no sound but the snap of the cord. The sphere vanished from sight too fast for the gallery to track. The first target dropped, struck dead center, before most of the room registered he'd even fired. Silence, not applause. Silence, the kind that means a room is still deciding what it just saw. He loaded the second sphere. Snap. The second target dropped. He loaded the third. Snap. The third target dropped. Up on the overhead display, the telemetry drones blinked red, throwing the same error across every readout. Unexpected external kinetic event, no energy signature detected. The system had no category for what was happening on the floor in front of it. Cashin lowered the frame slightly. "Do I need to miss one to get a score?" A few cadets in the gallery laughed, not at him this time, but with something closer to disbelief. The Silvari cadet from the bench confrontation sat forward in her seat, arms no longer crossed. Maroth didn't answer the joke. He raised one clawed hand, and the targets along the back wall shifted into motion, jittering across unpredictable paths designed to defeat exactly the kind of prediction Cashin's weapon didn't have. "Mobile targets," Maroth said. "No guidance system has ever failed this stage." Cashin loaded again. He didn't wait for the targets to settle into a pattern because there wasn't one to wait for. He fired between his own heartbeats, the way he'd practiced 10,000 times on a coastline nobody in this chamber had ever seen. One drone spiraled and crashed. A second lost its rotor mid-flight, control gone before it even understood it had been hit. He never rushed. He never flinched. Each shot looked, from the gallery, almost lazy, which was the part that unsettled people most. Maroth's compound eyes tracked the wreckage on the floor, then lifted toward the ceiling rail where one more unit waited, smaller than the rest, gold-plated, deliberately placed behind a pair of reflective shields. His own personal assistant drone. Cashin saw it too. He didn't ask why it was there. He didn't have to. That unit, Maroth said, voice carefully even, is not part of the evaluation set. Is it a target? Cashin asked. It is mine. Is it a target? Cashin said again, not as a question this time. The chamber went quiet enough that the hum of the absorption panels filled the whole room. Somewhere above, a junior instructor leaned forward without realizing it, the first time all morning he'd done anything but watch. Maroth's mandibles clicked once. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He simply didn't move it. Cashin loaded the final sphere. No guidance, no targeting, no second chance. He drew the cord back, breath slowing past the point where most people would have started shaking. The shields blocked every direct line to the drone. There was no straight path, no clean shot, nothing the chamber's own systems would have called a valid attempt. He released. The sphere struck the first shield at an angle, bounced, and curved through the air on nothing but the spin he'd put into it at the moment of release. A piece of physics no algorithm in the room had bothered to track, because no algorithm in the room expected a human hand to use it on purpose. It cleared the second shield. It was still in the air when the gallery lights flickered, every drone overhead recalculating the same impossible trajectory at once, and 300 cadets leaned forward at the exact same second to watch where it landed. The drone never had a chance to log what hit it. The sphere caught the gold-plated casing dead in the sensor port, a sound like a coin dropped into a steel cup, and the unit's lights died mid-blink. It spiraled once, trailing a thin curl of smoke, and dropped straight through the gap between the two reflective shields it had been hiding behind. It hit the chamber floor and didn't move again. For 3 full seconds, nobody in the gallery breathed. Then the room broke apart into noise, gasps, half-laughs, someone clapping before catching themselves, the overhead drones still cycling the same error message on a loop because they had no category for what they'd just recorded. Cashin lowered the frame. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. Maroth crossed the floor to the wreckage himself, claws closing around the smoking casing before anyone else could touch it. When he turned back to Cashin, his voice had lost its careful neutrality. You aimed for my property. It was the only one watching me, Cashin said. You deliberately fired at a drone that was not marked for evaluation. I fired at the most difficult target available. Maroth's jaw worked once, mandibles clicking hard enough that the cadets nearest him went quiet. You struck it perfectly. I didn't miss, Cashin said, not pride, just fact. Up in the gallery, the Silvari cadet who'd called the Slingshot a child's toy had gone very still. Watching the wreckage smoke on the floor like it had personally rearranged something in her understanding of the morning. Maroth didn't dismiss the chamber right away. He stood over the dead drone a long moment, the room holding its breath around him before he finally said, "Evaluation concluded," and walked out without looking at anyone. The incident report sat unfiled for 2 full days. When it finally went into the archive, it landed in a category that didn't exist yet, not equipment malfunction, not disciplinary action, not commendation. The clerks who processed academy paperwork had a folder for everything except this. Someone created a new one just to hold it. Unclassified biological method. Buried at the bottom of the report, under a line of technical readings nobody outside the instructor's office would ever see. Maroth had added 4 words in his own hand. Do not underestimate biological solutions. He hadn't shown that note to anyone. He hadn't planned to. 2 mornings later, Cashin sat alone at the peripheral maintenance range, the same bench he'd used the night before evaluation. The cord had started to fray at the notch again, the way it always did after hard use, and he pulled a spare strip from his satchel and began threading it through the frame, checking the tension by feel the way he'd done 1,000 times before. It was a small, ordinary thing. Nobody watching would have called it important. He didn't notice the Silvari cadet until she was already standing at the edge of the range, arms uncrossed for the first time since he'd met her. "Can I try it?" she asked. Cashin looked up. "You said it was a toy." "I did." She didn't look away. "I also said your aim couldn't be better than my system. I was wrong about one of those things, and I'd like to find out about the other." He handed her the frame without a word. She held it wrong at first, gripping it like a weapon instead of a tool, and he reached over and repositioned her fingers on the cord without comment. Her first shot went wide by almost a full body length. Her second went wider. "It doesn't correct for me," she said, frustrated. "No," Cashin agreed. "That's the whole design." She didn't get a clean hit that morning, but she didn't put the frame down either, not for almost an hour, and when she finally returned it, she didn't say another word about toys. The summons came on the 3rd morning, the same way every official notice came across the academy. Silent, sudden, appearing on every senior cadet's terminal at once. Report to Observation Hall Cascade. Bring your issued analog tool. No substitutions. Cashin read it once. Something in the wording sat wrong with him, though he couldn't have said exactly what. No substitutions wasn't a phrase the Academy used for ordinary drills. He wasn't the only one who noticed. Across the dormitory ring, terminals were lighting up one after another, and for the first time since the Slingshot had landed on an evaluation table, the cadets weren't laughing about it. They were asking each other what kind of test needed a phrase like that. Observation Hall Cascade wasn't built for training. It was built for review, a tiered chamber where instructors dissected failed designs in front of whole cohorts, walls lined with the kind of clean, unforgiving light that made every flaw visible. Cadets who'd never set foot inside it before now filed through its doors holding tension frames against their thighs, some of them obvious copies assembled overnight, hurried and uneven. Maroth stood at the front of the hall, ceremonial stillness in every line of him, the same stillness Cashin had first seen across an evaluation table 3 days ago. Something about him had changed since the chamber, though. Cashin couldn't name it yet. It sat somewhere behind the compound eyes, in the slowness of how he waited for the room to settle before he spoke. "Today," Maroth said, "you will not fire to hit." The hall went quiet in a different way than it had for the evaluation, confused, not impressed. "You will fire to miss," Maroth continued. "Not into open air, not a careless shot that falls short by accident. You will miss by exactly the width of a hand. No measurement tools, no second attempts, one cadet at a time. Load, draw, release." Nobody moved for a long moment. Then a Tolikian cadet near the front muttered, just loud enough to carry, "That's not a test of accuracy. That's a test of restraint." Maroth's mandibles clicked once, the smallest possible answer. He didn't explain further. He simply pointed to the line painted across the floor, and the first cadet stepped forward to try. She missed by too much. The next missed by too little, the bearing clipping the target's edge and triggering a harsh buzz from the chamber sensors. A third overcorrected so badly his shot didn't even register as an attempt. One after another, cadets who had hit moving targets without a flicker of doubt now stood frozen at the line, unable to make their hands fail on command. Cashin watched from the back row, satchel still closed, his own turn not yet called. He didn't know it yet, but the answer to this test, the one piece nobody in that hall could see coming, wasn't going to come from his eyes at all. It was going to come from something his grandfather had taught him on a coastline 1,000 light years from this chamber, something about wind that had nothing to do with weather. Maroth's gaze swept the room once, found Cashin near the back, and held there a half-second longer than it needed to. "Cadet Vey," he said, "you're next." Cashin stepped to the line and set the satchel down. He didn't open it right away. He ran his thumb along the cord one more time, checking the new strip's tension the way he'd checked it every morning since he was 9 years old, an old habit that had nothing to do with this moment and everything to do with it. He loaded the sphere. He drew the cord back with 3 fingers and stopped breathing. He didn't aim at the target. He aimed beside it, a hand's width left, the same distance every cadet before him had failed to find. He let go. The sphere left the cord clean and straight, cut the air close enough to the target's edge that the chamber's pressure sensors caught the disturbance and logged it before the bearing even finished its flight. It missed exactly where he meant it to miss. Not short, not long, not close. A hand's width, no more, no less. A single green light blinked above the target. The room let out a breath it had been holding since the summons arrived. Maroth crossed the floor slowly, the way he had after the drone fell, except this time his hands stayed open at his sides instead of closing around evidence. He stopped in front of Cashin and studied him a moment before he spoke. "Why did you fire left?" "The wind," Cashin said. "There's no wind in this hall." "There was when I stepped in." Cashin tapped 2 fingers against his own temple. "It's not a measurement. It's something my hand learned before I had words for it. Numbers don't tell me that. My body does." Maroth went still in a way that had nothing to do with ceremony. His compound eyes processed something for a long moment, something that didn't come from any readout in the chamber. He didn't say anything else. He simply reached into his robe and drew out a long shape wrapped in dark cloth, setting it on the bench between them and stepping back the way a person steps back from something they're afraid to be thanked for. Cashin unwrapped it slowly. Underneath the cloth was another slingshot, older than his own by what looked like centuries, the frame carved from a dense, dark wood unlike anything grown on Earth. The bands weren't synthetic. They were some kind of treated organic fiber, translucent, humming faintly under his fingers, not with stored energy, just with the tension of something built to be used, not displayed. "Before pulse throwers," Maroth said quietly, "before this academy existed, my people carried these. We called them skybows. I studied weapons for 70 years and forgot what one felt like in my own claws until I watched you hold yours." Cashin turned it over once, feeling the balance settle into his palm the way his own frame had settled there years ago. Somebody made this knowing exactly what they wanted it to do. "Somebody did," Maroth agreed, "long before either of us." The Academy's incident archive changed within the week. Cashin's name moved out of the unclassified folder and into a new category that hadn't existed 3 days earlier: Technique Originator, Analog Method. Underneath it, a single line from Maroth's own report, the same 4 words he'd written before anyone told him to: "Do not underestimate biological solutions." The Council of Applied Combat Science didn't argue with him. They rarely argued with 70 years of institutional memory, and this time that memory was pointing somewhere new. Within a month, mandatory analog training drills were added to the second-year curriculum. A stillness aptitude test, built on the same fire-to-miss principle Cashin had passed without flinching, became a prerequisite for advancement. Nobody called it a tribute to nostalgic kinetics anymore. The Silvari cadet kept practicing on the maintenance range most evenings, her hits growing tighter by the week, though she never quite matched Cashin's first clean shot. She stopped calling the frame a toy. She started calling it hers once she'd built one of her own. Weeks later, Cashin sat at the same peripheral range under the same simulated sky, the original tension frame resting across his knees. The wood had darkened further now, the new cord starting its own slow wear at the notch, the satchel of tungsten spheres a little lighter than it used to be. Maroth found him there, the way he sometimes did now, and sat down on the bench without announcement. "I've taught for 70 years, Maroth said. "I've reviewed every weapon this academy has produced. I never once heard a room go silent the way it did after your shot. It wasn't the weapon that did that, Cashin said. No, Maroth agreed. It was what you reminded everyone they'd forgotten. They sat without talking for a while, the kind of quiet that didn't need filling. Maroth finally asked, "Do you still hunt where you come from?" "We never stopped," Cashin said. "We just stopped calling it a weapon." "What do you call it now?" "A tool, sometimes a game, sometimes a warning." Maroth's mandibles clicked once, softer than Cashin had ever heard them. He didn't ask anything else. The Academy's curriculum entry for primitive ranged weaponry still listed Cashin's frame first, ahead of every later edition. Energy source, none. Assist systems, none. Recommended use, when instinct matters more than code. A clerk had added one more line beneath the official text, unofficial, unremoved by anyone who'd read it. Don't underestimate the hand. It remembers more than machines ever will. Cashin graduated months later without honors, his name absent from any list that measured rank. He didn't seem to mind. On his last evening at the academy, he stood at the edge of the maintenance range one final time, the original frame in his satchel beside the vel-carved recurve Maroth had given him, both worn smooth now in different places by different hands. He loaded one last sphere, more out of habit than purpose, and let it fly into the dark beyond the range lights. He didn't watch where it landed. He already knew.